Hello, Motorrada World fans, and welcome to this episode of Talking MotoGP with myself, Rob Portman, and Paul Scott. We're going to be talking MotoGP from the latest round out at Qatar. A big welcome to all of our South African viewers and our international viewers. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are around the world. Get nice and comfortable. We've got a lot of Talking MotoGP to do from what was one of the more entertaining weekends that we've certainly had recently, but a lot of controversy and a lot of talking points that we're going to get through. So I'm not going to go through all the massive names here. We've got all the usual contenders joining us in the comment section. If you're new to the show, please get your comment in. We definitely try and touch upon as many comments as we can. It's not a show about what Paul and I say goes. It's a show for everyone, for the fans, by the fans. So really get your say in, please. Paul, you're keeping well from what was a really entertaining weekend of motor racing, not just from MotoGP, but also World Superbike and all the supporting classes there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, Rob. How's it? And good evening and welcome to everyone who's tuned in. As you said, Rob, wherever you are. One thing I'd like to just point out, there was a heck of a lot of South African support at this weekend's MotoGP, which is fantastic to see. I also know for us as South Africans, it's probably one of the cheaper rounds and easier rounds to get to. So, yeah, really great to see. I just saw hundreds of people getting autographs from the Binders, and those that didn't get were saying, how do we get it? So, yeah, really nice to see. And, yeah, Rob, I think let's just dive straight into it because there's certainly a few controversial things and a few issues that we're going to try and resolve for some of our MotoGP riders.
Yeah, let's see. Hopefully we've got the golden ball and they're all listening. They can hear. Talking about Qatar, Jenny Blake, good evening. All Grant and Jenny here. We were in Qatar at the weekend to watch the MotoGP. Incredible to experience it. This in-person bucket list stuff. And it does. James Dent and I were supposed to go back in 2020 and then COVID hit. So unfortunately, that's one round that I haven't been to, but it did. It looks spectacular. Everyone that's been has told me it's amazing. So definitely one that I want to get to. So Jenny, thanks for that comment, and I'm pretty sure you enjoyed. It's the greatest thing in the world watching a live MotoGP. It really is. You just can't beat it. So Paul, a lot of people are already starting in the comments, and we'll jump straight into it. We'll start with KTM, of course, our Darryn Binder and that whole KTM project, because we normally wait later in the show to kind of get into it, but it's becoming, it's always been a hot topic, but it's just becoming more and more of a hot, irritating, frustrating topic. This weekend there was almost a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel, and that tunnel got bombarded and TNT'd very quickly with the penalty and stuff. But a frustrating weekend all round for KTM, other than the Maverick Vinales performance. I'll start with the Maverick Vinales performance because, yes, the tire pressure. He was under. He got the 16-second or whatever penalty. He dropped to 14th. Maverick Vinales looked, I don't know if you watched, if everyone saw how happy. He wasn't upset at all about the penalty. He kind of just said, penalty, no penalty. I was there. I was competitive. I felt great on the bike. And that's more important than anything. And you have to agree with that. Feeling good on the bike. They haven't felt good. Vibration, chatter, this, that. KTM are just all over the show. And Maverick was able to go out. Yes, you do get an advantage with a low tire pressure. I understand that. But I still think there was a lot of positives to take from that performance. I watched how he rode the bike. I didn't see him going sideways. I saw very direct Maverick. I saw a strong Maverick. We've touched upon it. When Maverick's in that kind of mood, he's almost unbeatable. And it was great to see Maverick riding with that confidence and that. I'm forgetting the tire pressure here now. I just saw a package that could have potential because of how Maverick set it up. Now, Bastianini came out after the race saying, Maverick had a KTM that the rest of us couldn't have. And this is where KTM need to sort it out. We'll digress that and take the KTM story further. But a lot of positives to see from Maverick, who looked buoyed. And despite, if he knew it was all front tire pressure, I think there would have been a more realistic, okay, well, this might be a bit of smoke and mirrors here. But the guy genuinely seemed like, we found something on that bike.
Yeah, Rob, there's so many little nuances to dive into with this story. On the negative side, when you heard the interview with Maverick after he had been given the penalty, he turned around and said, I didn't see any warnings on my dash. I was so busy concentrating. Okay, I'm going to say BS to that.
Yeah, I agree. 100%.
And I don't want to throw Marc Marquez into the conversation already, but I'm going to. It happened to him in the first race of the year. What did he do? He just dropped behind his brother for however long, 6, 8, 10, whatever it was, laps, sorted that out, and then went to the front and won. I think in hindsight, my opinion, what Maverick should have done, dropped behind Marc, or if it was Morbidelli who was still leading at the time, sat there for 4 laps, 5 laps. He would have salvaged at worst a 3rd place.
Yes.
At absolute worst. Now he gets relegated to 14. I hear what you're saying. It was fantastic. I think Maverick was good the whole weekend. He was good in practice. He was good in qualifying. So to say that it was because of the tire pressure that he had such a good run, I don't think that definitely came into play, no doubt. But was that the, let's call it 0.3 of a second that KTM, or half a second that they've been lacking? Would it make that much difference? I don't believe so. But what we've highlighted many times, and let's talk about Qatar last year, when Maverick's on it, difficult to beat him. Very, very difficult. The problem with Maverick, and we've discussed it, Rob, you're lucky if you get it twice in a season, but generally it's a once in a season story. The fact that, as you mentioned, Bastianini saying he had a bike that we can't have.
Yeah.
And his words weren't that we haven't got. He said it's a bike we can't get. What's the can't? Is it a bike that was built purely for Maverick? This is where, and we've discussed it in the past, KTM, one going left field, one going right field, one going up. That's the problem. But going back to Maverick, very, very impressive. I just think as a professional motorcycle rider, he certainly had the wherewithal to say, okay, I'm going to drop back. If it means I come 3rd, it's better than finishing 14th. I understand he was there to prove a point. That's all he was doing. But that's Maverick, as you've said many times. Maverick looks after Maverick, and that's it. Now, it's such a issue to debate. Was he wrong? Was he right? I don't know. Personally, I think he made a mistake for the whole team. And when I say the team, KTM as a brand, he should have done whatever he needed to do to get that tire pressure back to where it should be. He knows that. We know that. And taken a 3rd for the team. But he didn't. He worried about Maverick. And that, to me, is the disappointing thing. The good thing, as you mentioned, does this mean there's potential? But just go back a year. Who finished 2nd in the sprint and the main race? Darryn Binder. So is it just a track that at least one of the KTMs clicks with? I don't know. If we don't limit this conversation, Rob, I can tell you what, we could be here for days.
No, we could be here forever. As I said, pointing out the positives of it, I enjoyed the way I saw Maverick riding that motorcycle. I think, I looked at it a couple of times last year with Pedro. That's the way the bike needs to be ridden to get the best out of it. And as Brett Lawson says here, the TNT commentators said that the Mavericks told them on Saturday in an interview that the bike has chatter, but has to be ridden differently and it has to be ridden in a different way. And I think he found something, and I could see the way he was riding it. It wasn't out of shape at all. It was very direct. He kept it upright for as long as he could on the brakes. He just looked so assured in that front end, which, yes, the tire pressure would attribute to, but I don't believe a tire pressure would, like as you said, solve all the problems. Now, all of a sudden, this bike, where the other 3 are miles behind, it's going to now find him 17 seconds or whatever he was ahead of Brad. Tire pressure alone, I don't think so. I think there were other factors that contributed to it. What I will say, deep sea diver Smith's got the answer here for us. Mav was running Ola.
There we go. Deep sea, I love you, my boy.
I'm Richie. Maverick has a fragile ego and is easily flustered. Yvonne Pretorius, you're very late. That's a slap on the wrist for you. What I will bring up, Paul, we'll talk about the tire pressure and how stupid it is. Tire pressure. What I want to highlight, Vinales rode brilliantly either way. The tire pressure was an aside to that. Marquez said it all when he said he thought it was a Costa because he's the fastest KTM rider. That's from Oli Moto. So the disappointing side to me or the frustrating side to me for the Maverick Vinales thing is exactly like you've pointed out, personal gain for Maverick. And again, in that interview that they had with Jorge Poncharal said, I love having Maverick in the team. It's like he's just this little kid in the box that just loves to go riding his bike and stuff. And I sat there going, okay, that's all well and good, having that excitement, and he just wants to climb on the bike and that. I don't know if I would want a kid attitude in my MotoGP team, and that comes out. That kid throwing my toys out the cot, and that mentality comes out with Maverick too often, and that's why he can't keep his head and stuff. And as you brought up the comment there, I didn't look at my dash. I was just focused. He knew exactly what, this is the difference. As you don't want to bring up the Marquez and put Marquez in the spotlight, but that's the difference. Marc looks, manages, controls, adjusts, and gets the best result, makes it all work. Maverick knew that his tire pressure was, he just went, well, you know what, bugger this. Either he knew that if I drop back, that tire pressure is going to spike and then I have no feeling, I'm going to drop like a stone, or you know what, let me get a little bit of time in the spotlight here. Is this fast KTM? I'll deal with the tire pressure. He knows that everyone's going to just bitch about the tire pressure rules. So it was more personal gain, but at the same token, I do think, when you're feeling that good with a bike after the start of the season he's had, he was probably just enjoying having that feeling and going. So it's a split kind of conversation for me, because on one hand I go, Jesus, I love to see Maverick Vinales riding like that. I love to see the KTM competitive, and I loved that whole part of what was going on track. And then there's the Maverick Vinales in his head side going, well, why don't you just look at your dash and manage that race a little bit better? Even a top 5 would have been fantastic.
Yeah.
Why are those little things? Why is Jorge Poncharal saying it's brilliant to have this kid that's happy to ride his bike in the those kind of little things just frustrate me still about Vinales. But I do hope it is. I hope it's not just smoke and mirrors, and I do hope that Vinales has found something with, as Jorge Poncharal said, a 24 bike with bits of 25 on it. Every single we'll touch upon it now. Every single KTM that was out there was on different, but I'm just hoping there's some valuable data there that can translate to the other guys, and that KTM can finally make a step forward with.
Yeah, you see what worries me a little bit, Rob, on the KTM side is last year they said they're going to turn their focus towards Pedro Acosta, kind of saying, Brad, we're happy with you, but you must adapt to what he wants. Now we get to race 4 of this year, and Maverick goes, from what we've read and heard, he goes left field, and it works for him. Do they now change tack once again? Because then they've moved the goalposts from that side to that, and that's my concern. I'm not saying other manufacturers aren't or haven't done that in the past, but from what we see, it seems to be a little bit worse with KTM in that there's no middle ground and then a little bit this way and a little bit that way. It just seems to be one doing that. I mean, anyone who heard, and we get different commentary to what you watch.
Yes.
Our commentators were saying there were 4 different KTMs lining up on the grid. I would almost bet my house on the fact that for the last 2 seasons, you've had one iteration of a Ducati on the grid. Little changes here, little changes there, but not 3, 4, 5 completely different bikes. And that, I think that's where KTM are still falling short. To look at the comparison with Honda now, Honda seem to have made a step forward. They've had a change in management, and maybe Ramagnolia is now saying, listen, guys, this is our direction, and that's it. And everyone's fitting in there, and it seems to be working. I'm surmising here, I've got no idea. But KTM just, I don't know, Robert, still seems to be, okay, Brad, you try that. Pedro, you try that. And Naya, what do you think? Okay, and okay, that worked for Maverick. But no one else seems to be getting the same deal. So I don't know. It's such a, every MotoGP race we have, this is the talking point, because they're going nowhere. Yes, they had a great weekend with one rider. Where were the rest? So it's a very difficult one to try and pinpoint a solution for them. Not that we can do that, but why is there such disparity between 2 different riders on one weekend and then one rider and the 3 others? That's the worrying factor.
And like you said, you do kind of, you want to take hope from it, and you want to take as much positive as you can from it. And then I didn't even think of it like that, but then you highlight, like, Brad finishing his 2 seconds last year, and then, ultimately they weren't able to keep that kind of pace for the rest of the year. So it is just to break down the tire rule, to everyone, because it's still that same age-old question. Why can't they just start them on a tire pressure? Michelin sets it and whatever. It's a safety feature. So, but I again, listening to the TNT commentators that I get here, and a couple of other the podcasts that I watch and stuff, breaking it down, there's there's no real answer to it. And people thinking that Pirelli is going to be the answer. Pirelli is going to come with its own challenges, and because it's the ultimate. It's the pinnacle of motorsport, with the fastest riders, fastest machines, wanting to push every single corner, no matter what. These guys want to just push. I understand Michelin not wanting to let the teams, because a team like Ducati and Gigi Dall'Igna will push that boundary all the way. Do not run that tire pressure under 1.6. Gigi Dall'Igna and Marc, the real risk takers that really push the rule book and push the boundaries, will run it at 1.599.9999. And then there's the risk of it going to 1.4 and it delaminates or it just bursts. And then there's, you're going over the Magello Strait and that thing bursts or something. So I understand that from a safety point of view. But adversely, on the other flip side of that, it's the same with the tire pressure rising. The bike becomes unrideable. If I look at Jorge Martin's kind of crash and how that happened, and I'm not saying it's because of this, but that's generally what starts happening when a tire gets inflated. And I don't know if he was racing with people or what his tire pressure was, but generally you start getting a bit of understeer. I know Brad was complaining of front understeer. He was in a nice group there. So how do you set the tire pressure? The team set Maverick's tire pressure thinking he was going to be in a battle for 6th, 7th, 8th place with 4 riders running. Next minute he's running at the front in clean air by himself. So how do you manage that? And it's, as I said, adversely, you could say it's a safety thing for not going too low, but it's also a safety concern for going too high, because the bike becomes unrideable and it starts tucking the front and all these kind of things. So it's not an ideal situation. It's a horrible situation, but it is what we have at the moment. And let's just hope it can be kicked out sooner rather than later, because it does kind of spoil the whole effect and the whole everything. And because now you're going to be sitting every race kind of wondering, is this guy on the podium? Is he not on the podium? Blah, 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 blah. So that's just a quick overview. Again, it's something we could just talk days for. Jumping back to the KTM thing quickly, Paul, the biggest frustration for me out of the KTM this weekend was exactly what you've just said. How after 4 rounds, plus the testing that you did, you are still sending 4 bikes out there with, Pedro's gone back to the 24 bike. I'm cut full of this now. I'm going back to my 24 bike that I could at least, go semi-fast on. Doesn't perform. And we know what he did last year as a rookie, passing Marquez on the inside in turn 1, doing amazing things last year. Okay, just not managing his tires, but he was just nowhere. He wasn't even on the radar. I think that kid is just, he's not happy. His debriefs aren't happy. There's all this talk he's going 30 million to Honda, and I think he's already kind of, KTM, thanks for the contract, I'll buy you out, cheers. I think that's already a big option there. Then you had Bastianini, that rode a bike with no grab handle Aero on the back, no fins on the back, this and this and this, and just kind of circulated the whole weekend. Had a little bit of that late race pace at the end, but not really. Then you had Brad, who just probably just had the proof's in the pudding. He was almost 12 seconds slower in the sprint race that he finished second in last year. Wayne Taylor and I think it was Stephen Berry commented on our Facebook post earlier. He was 1 second slower qualifying. He did a 50.9 last year and a 51.9. So it was a complete backwards weekend for Brad. And I'm not blaming that on Brad at all. And that's another thing. We've got to stop this, especially as South Africans, getting on Brad's back on social media, because it's getting a bit tiring now. You either support the guy, you don't. You're in or out. You can have your frustrations in that, but just like when the Bokke lose, we love the Bokke because they're going to win at some point. Anyway, so that's the frustrating side for me. And then decisions like, okay, go out on the soft tire in the sprint race. It's like everyone knew. The Michelin guy probably begged them, do not go on the soft. It doesn't work. You can't do qualifying. Soft doesn't work on the KTM. The KTM's got too much mechanical grip. You put a soft tire on that offers more grip, and it's two positive magnets just going against each other. I'm not a technician by any means, but I could have told you. And then they go make those decisions. And it's like we're 4 runs in. Aki Ayo was supposed to be this, this brutal. I haven't seen any good decisions being made really yet so far from KTM. So that's the big frustrating part. And the biggest frustrating part is that Brad's involved with that, and it's kind of dragging him down into it. So I don't know what the answer is. Whether I'm hoping whatever concoction they came up with Maverick's bike, with him running that 25 tail piece and the 24 chassis or something, it's going to kind of carry itself. But as you said, it's hard to get excited because we've seen this before from KTM, and then nothing. They just have no consistency. They don't seem to have a direction. They don't seem to have a plan. While everyone else around them does, they're failing. Management is failing. Whatever they're doing is failing miserably. And it's you have to be as blunt as that. As much of a KTM fan as I am, as we all want to be because of Brad and everyone, it's failing. Something has to be done like dramatically.
Yeah, absolutely. And Rob, we've discussed it in the past. You can't be testing on a race weekend. Maybe if you had I'm going to use Paul Espargaro, who was their test rider. If you had him as a test rider racing, different story. But you're not going to be saying to Bastianini, okay, this weekend's your turn. You only testing new parts. He's there to try and be world champion. You can't do it to Brad. Pedro, no chance. So what are they actually doing? Now they've got, as we know, they ran 4 completely different bikes this weekend. So what are they going to do in Spain in 2 weeks' time? Are they going to flip a coin and say, okay, oh, look, lucky draw, Brad, it's your turn to choose the setup? That's not going to help them. They seem once again to be a little bit directionless. And I think that's part of the issue. But as you said, Aki Ayo was supposed to be the put this whole plan together and get it heading forward. Just doesn't seem to be working. And you know exactly what's going to happen. Maverick had a great weekend. So, of course, they're going to now favor what he says. So now suddenly we might be getting a swing from one extreme to the other, which might not suit Brad, might not suit Pedro. So then they're going 2 steps back once again. So very difficult one for them to solve. Really, it's a proper issue for them. And now I think it's become more than, as we've discussed, possibly the carbon chassis and the suspension. I think now there's just so much going on that now they've got to a point where they don't know what they're doing.
Yeah, Alex Fullion says, don't think any of us are against Brad. We will support him no matter what, trying to understand why. The hard part is his riding style, yada, yada, yada. And Alex, I can understand the frustration. I mean, Brad's probably the most frustrated person out of all of us. The guy he flies and he leaves his beautiful wife with the baby on the way at home to go compete. He doesn't fly to Qatar to go ride around in 14th, 15th place and not be competitive. He might as well just stay at home. And I take my hat off to Brad because I always message him and Darryn before the race weekend, and just a good luck. And Brad always replies. And this one again, he was like, "Thanks, Uncle. I'm ready to go for it, ready to go at it." And I'm like, here's a guy that could quite easily message me back privately and say, "Yes, I'm tired of this, Uncle. Look, I've had enough of this and this." But the guy just remains focused, remains positive. Someone asked earlier, when are we going to speak to Bjorn and that? Finally, we should have it done by next week, Tuesday, because there's the break. They're back to Europe. So travel won't come into play or anything. So look out for it next week, Tuesday. And these are the kind of questions we'll ask Bjorn. Give us a little bit more insight into the actual box. But getting back to Alex, and South African fans, I can understand the frustration because I also look from the outside in going, and that's what I'm saying. That's why I liked the big part I loved about Maverick Vinales was how he was riding that bike. And, I've said it many times before, I'd like Brad to be a bit more direct with how he is with the bike and not back it in and float it and not try and take those wide sweeping lines. The KTM needs to be kind of put into a line, both wheels in the same line and kind of that kind of thing. It's easy to say from the outside. The hard part for Brad is, that's all he's known. And that's what's been his strong point. And for years it worked. The guy won his second or third race as a MotoGP rider at Brno against all the world's best, Franco Morbidelli, Valentino Rossi, Marc, all these guys were there. And Brad outsmarted and outrode all of them. He's finished the top KTM for how many years? He's finished the best non-Ducati for how many years? So it's easy to go say, no, well, it's his riding style. And I do think it could get better, but it's clearly worked for Brad, and it's how he wants it. It's just he's not getting the bike, the feeling, the tires, whatever it is. It's just not gelling at the moment. I think Jerez could be a different kettle of fish. The frustrating part from this, the biggest frustrating, I keep using that word frustrating, it's horrible. The last show I said Qatar is going to be a good yardstick for KTM. Brad was second there last year, and I dived into the times. I sent them straight after you. Again, Olimoto is one that'll just throw specs down our throats and in our minds all day long. 12 seconds off in the sprint race compared to last year.
Yeah.
Okay, wrong tire choice from the team or the rider, whoever made that silly decision when clearly everyone was supposed to be on mediums. And then in the main race, just didn't have it. And this is a guy that 1 year ago finished second and pushed Martin and Pecco Bagnaia, the two title contenders and the GP24 Ducati, to the absolute limit and to the end. And this time, the whole weekend, he just wasn't there. He was 1 second slower than his previous qualifying time. So if you base it all on that, it's a terrible picture. It's an awful picture. But I do think, as I said, I do think the KTM story is, I don't have the golden ball. None of us do. They clearly don't at the moment. But I do think Fabio Quartararo commented, I like that he came out of the weekend, was, thanks Yamaha, we've improved, but we've got to stop this now. Sending me out every session, testing this. We can't do it. We've got to find a direction. And Zarco looks like the best kind of example of, he's found a way that he wanted to go. And he was pretty vocal about it, especially last year when I did the debrief at Silverstone that I went to. Marini was kind of going his way and Zarco was going, there's some things, but, I'm kind of going my way and I'm sticking to my way. And look at the progress that they've made there. Someone commented earlier, Richard Steiner, again, Honda not kind of focusing purely on Marc Marquez and how he wants to ride the bike. They're taking all these other parameters in. And it's just working. So whatever the thought process, whatever the plan, if there is one from KTM, they've got to do that, and they've got to now go back to the drawing board and find something else, because it's already been a long, hard season. Feels like it's been a long, hard season, and we're 4 rounds in.
4 races, yeah. Rob, and another thing that I've been thinking about, and I'm sure, KTM have got a brains trust of probably 20 people sitting down every minute of every day trying to figure what to do. But if you go back to when last KTM won, so from when they last won, which I think was 2022, it's 21, so it's 3 seasons. The thing that's changed the most, I'm going to say, is Aero. That's made probably the most leaps and changes to MotoGP. Next, I'm going to say, is when they brought in the electronics that everyone got the same.
Yes.
So maybe those are 2 factors. I'm still sticking to my guns that they should be on Öhlins. I'm 100%. That's my opinion. But why don't they go back to 2021 or whenever it was, when they were competitive week in and week out, and say, what was our Aero package? How much have we changed? What have the other bikes done? They see so much. They can see exactly. And maybe they need to go back to that as a starting point. I'm not saying they haven't done that. And electronics-wise as well. James Dent has always said to me, KTM's biggest downfall, he thinks, electronics. They're behind on the electronics, even though everyone's got the same. If your electronics oak can do something to, and I'm going to use the word manipulate, set it up, whatever it is, 0.1 of a second. You try to switch a stopwatch on and off in 0.1 of a second. That's all it is, Rob, or 0.3 of a second. So those 2 elements to me, Aero and electronics, that's where I would go back to, not to, and we don't know if KTM have or haven't. And so, okay, that's what it was then. How have we changed it going forward? And where do we look to try and improve it? Because they can't just keep seeing let's try that. Because you look at the back of the KTM, it looks like a Batmobile, and they're the only ones doing that. So that would be, and I'm sure they've done that. They got way cleverer oaks than me working in the team. But just, as we've said, they just seem to be jumping from place to place. And now it's time to, like I mentioned to you, that podcast with Oxley Bomb, where they said Albessiani obviously saw Honda have got what it takes, but they're always changing. Stop that now. That's our direction and go with it. So maybe that's what KTM need, is somebody to stop all this, everyone rides something different. And that was always our thinking, like with Ducati. Oh, that's great. You're getting, instead of twice the amount of info, now you're getting 4 times the amount of info. But if it's 4 completely different sets of info, that doesn't help anyone.
It is. And I like the idea, like you said, about going back to the 2021 kind of what did work. As Sven Gruner points out, there's a reason why Ducati ditched the carbon frame and why nobody else uses it. You know, I know KTM in some ways are trying to reinvent the wheel with WP suspension, this carbon kind of hybrid frame, trellis plus this, and you know, just at some you just kind of go, right, let's just try and base ourselves on what's out there, as you said, what everyone's running, the more information, and then go from there. With a WP, I mean, we're not going to go into it because it's again another show in itself. The WP in Oland's baffles me, but I know WP is your company, your in-house company. You are not going to lose anything by jumping to Oland's. You're not going to lose anything at all. No one's going to buy less WP, or people are buying Oland's over WP anyway. You know, there's the odd little guy that wants to be different and he goes his WP route, and it works well on your off-road bikes and your MX bikes. Let it work there. Let it work there. Sell that there. No one is buying WP for their superbike based on this. No superbike in the entire world comes out production with stock standard WP. Other than KTM, nothing comes out with WP suspension. So they do. They need a complete reset. They really do, and it needs to be big decisions that need to be made because they can't carry on like this. The money's, sponsors are going to be knocking on the door saying you're going to lose riders like Pedro Acosta to Honda, 30 million. I think that's already potentially a done deal. How do you get flashed 30 million in front of you from Honda as a Spanish rider? You know,
and you see Zarco suddenly performing,
beating you. You're supposed to be the next big hype. You're still waiting for your first win. It's a year and a half into your MotoGP career. You know, and then there's Firmin Aldeguer hopping on a Ducati already, just outperforming you, and they hate each other. They used to be best friends. They hate each other. So it's all those kind of factors that are now coming in, and KTM are going to, you know, you talk about rocking the boat in a sinking ship. It's going to get to that point where, you know, the other it's not a frustrating thing. It's a good human quality to have of Brad Binder, but it's a frustrating thing as a fan because you want to actually just hear him go, you know what? This is not good enough, and KTM need to pull up their effing socks. I'm tired of this now. But Brad won't. Brad will say, oh, you know what? We worked hard. Big thanks to my team. We tried everything, and it just didn't work. Well done, Maverick Vinales. We go to the next one. It's great. Listen, that's a good, respectful, positive human being, which Brad Binder is. You know, but at some time, you just want to hear the, you know what, bugger that now. I'm over that now. I want to hear this. I flew all the way to Qatar when my baby could have been born any second to ride that and do that and have all these riders beat me, and a Luca Marini beat me, and a Jorge Martin that's never ridden his Aprilia thrashing me in a sprint race at one point. No. It's not the way to go. So it's a very, you know, I look at Pedro Acosta as well. Last year in the Tech 3 team, and this is another conversation with the KTM. Tech 3 team, Maverick Vinales performing, and Bastianini has had the odd little good performance so far this year. Pedro Acosta performed much better in the satellite team compared to what he's doing in the factory team. Now, is that because the satellite team are making, you know, getting what the factory team's feeding, and they're just going, okay, that's nice, but we'll try this? Are the factory team just getting it completely wrong? Or is the factory team just too much pressure? Is it a pressure cooker environment? You know, Hervé Poncherol's team is very much like a Cressini, where it's a family-run guy. Hervé Poncherol's like a granddad to everyone. He hugs and kisses and everything. Is that Pit Vira and that factory KTM, you know, just too, you know, Pit Vira coming out now and also saying, you know, Pedro Acosta, our blue-eyed boy, we've got him under contract. And it's just a pressure cooker environment. That whole environment, it's a toxic environment.
Well, it can become very toxic, Rob. You know, we don't know the ins and outs, and hopefully, if you get to chat to Bjorn next week or whenever it happens, you know, if he doesn't have to tell us good or bad, but if he can give us a little bit of a behind the scenes insight, it might make us more fearful, but it might also put our minds to rest, because there's absolutely no doubt in my mind Brad's getting into debriefs with the team and telling them he's not happy. Absolutely. There's no ways he goes there and says, hey, guys, I know you did your best. Thanks. He's saying, BS, guys. We told you X, Y, and Z, and you did A, B, and C, if that's the case. Absolutely. But it's not helping. You know, it's not lining the ducks up for them. So, but that'll be interesting to see. So it's such a difficult one. But if we could, you know, if Bjorn can give us any kind of, he doesn't have to give the Skinner, but just, you know, what is the general demeanor like in the pits? because we saw it with Aprilia last year. When Maverick and Aleix decided enough was enough, that became very toxic, very, very toxic. Yeah. So it's, it can, especially when 4 of you are butting heads against each other. So, yeah, I don't know. It's a very difficult one.
James, then every now and then he has something smart to say. It's actually not very often at all. But KTM ditched the Motorex oil, moved to Mobil 1 and found 6 horsepower, maybe change from WPs on the cards. People go on about, Brad Foster's through the speed traps, 361.2 kilometers an hour. That's great. Casey Stoner and Ducati for a long time had the fastest motorcycle on the planet. But, Casey Stoner made it work. But it's not the be all and end all. I think Ducati have proven that Ducati is the fastest bike, but it's how do you and people keep a lookout on our Facebook page. I'm going to post a link that Paul sent to me it's about a 25-minute sit down interview with Marc Marquez, a human side of Marc Marquez, which is just it's a brilliant watch. To all the haters or people that just don't like Marc Marquez, it's just a good watch. It's just an open, honest conversation with a human being that's Marc Marquez, and he talks about the differences between how he had to be fast on a Honda and how he has to be fast on a Ducati, which is very interesting. And it's in some ways relates to how I could see the KTM. Is that he said the Honda, it's how you get in the corner, it's how you get in that corner, and during the corner is how you got fast on the Honda. Coming out meant nothing because the Honda just didn't come out. And you could see that. I mean, that was evident with how Marc Marquez used to ride a Honda. And he says on the Ducati now, it's so much different. He can just kind of roll into the corner, but it's how you come out of the corner and take advantage of that ride-out device that works the best. The power delivery, how it works the best. The electronics, how it does. There's no, other than the engine braking and a couple of things going into the corner, that's fine with the front end, but how you come out, how much the traction control is limiting. And that's something from the side of the track I've always heard. James and I have heard. Anyone that's been to the side of the track with a keen ear will hear. The KTM, especially like Portimao, I remember the ones coming up over that crest onto the front straight. All the other bikes, like the Ducatis, that you'd hear this, like a slight traction control kick in, and just retard the power a little bit to get it down and going. The KTM, I just kept saying to Brad, are you hooking a false neutral? Are you hitting limiter? Like that bike's just cutting out. And he's like, it's electronics just cutting out every time, And as you said, you brought it up. The electronics does seem to be a very big disconnect as well. The thing with the KTM as well is you could pinpoint it to electronics, aero, engine, suspension, chassis. You know what I mean? At one stage with Yamaha, you could say, okay, the engine's maybe a bit long in the tooth. The Honda was definitely aero that they just got muddled up with. So you know what? Again, you could kind of pinpoint things more. With KTM, it's just this giant blanket of hopelessness.
Robin, I just want to mention something. You mentioned the KTM being the fastest, so we know there's no problem with the power. Look at the Honda; it's the slowest, and yet Zarco and Marini beat 3 of the 4 KTMs on the weekend.
Exactly.
It's the slowest bike. It's a 1 kilometer straight at 260 k's an hour. And yet, because they've sorted out a different aspect of their bike, yes, I understand. If Honda find another 5 kilometers an hour, I think we'll see an even more competitive package. But right now, they're making do with a bike that seems to handle a hell of a lot better than it used to. They're getting the power, because Honda's big problem was, as Marc Marquez said in that interview, and we heard it all the time from Zarco last year, out the corners. Yes. Too much horsepower, wheel spinning, and once it starts wheel spinning, there's nothing you can do. So they've sorted that out. KTM need to, that's why I say, go back to 2 or 3 years ago when things were working. I understand the goalposts have moved, but they need a reference point and move on from there. To use a Ducati of this weekend or an Aprilia or a Honda as the reference point, they can't, because they are not on a Honda, Ducati, KTM, Yamaha. They're on the KTM. So that would be my thinking. But as I say, they've probably done that. But electronically too, there's a good example. You say hearing that Portimao over there, down that start-finish straight. The electronics is, in today's modern MotoGP, is equally as important as your aero, which is equally as important as the way your motor makes the power. So, it's common. As you said, you highlighted 5 things. You can't just pick one. All of them have to work in conjunction, but you also can't be changing 5 things every single session on 4 different bikes. It's also not going to work.
Yeah, it's just got no adaptability to it, that KTM. It's just it's either works or it's off a cliff. They put a soft tire on in the sprint race and it just doesn't work. It's not like it kind of works, and we found it just doesn't work. And then they try this and it just doesn't work. And that kind of works good. You know what I mean? There's just no. Ducati just seems to just be so much more adaptable, and you can see it by the riders on the bike. Andre Calvert, Rob, did I not say last year that Acosta will pull the parachute in the factory team? And a couple of people did, and I do remember you saying that, Andre. So yeah, good call on that. And it does seem like it's playing out right in front of us. I cannot wait for the day they get rid of the ride height devices and Aero, ugly bikes, less exciting racing and less fun on your motor. Yeah, I'm very excited for 2027, I must say. So Brad's explanation today, I realized how he was struggling. So sad that the last race, I really thought he would find something for Qatar. So I'm just catching up on some comments here. Here we go. Sven Grunner. They need to rebuild the whole bike, starting from the chassis and swing arm. But do they have the budget or time since rule change 2027? And will they still be around come 2026? This is the cloud that hangs over KTM.
But Rob, I don't know if you heard it on TNT coverage. They had an interview with Pedro. I think it was Saturday, maybe just before, or during Q2 or just before. I can't remember. Anyway, and he said, please stop this BS that we're not here to race. We've got budget for testing. We have been testing. We've got budget to race 100%. And I understand that's the corporate response. But he got quite... I don't want to say worked up about it, but he was very authoritative in his way of saying the Oaks spreading. It's almost like you're saying, are spreading rumors and quit. We are here to race. The budget is in place. And he mentioned that whatever they call the Oaks doing the reshuffling of their budget, they've approved this. It's there, the money. So he's quite adamant that certainly 2025, they 100% committed. Whether that's corporate talk or not, we'll never know. But certainly from what he said, and as I say, he was getting his point across. There's no doubt you could see he was kind of put in the question. It was that Jack Appleyard who asked him. It's kind of putting him in his place almost, to the point that he was very authoritative. So that kind of, to me, it made me feel like, listen, he's telling us that, stop now. We're here to race. That's it. Leave that story. We've dealt with it. And for now, it's fine. 26, 27, different story. I think 27, everybody's going to have a reset. But KTM don't have a year and a half to say, we'll worry about 27. They've got to sort out their problems now.
Absolutely. Timothy Devi, Rob, do you have any idea what Brad is looking for options for 2026? We've spoken about this before. At this point in time, Brad's contracted in 2026, so he will be on a KTM. Knowing Brad, knowing his loyalty and everything, hard to say in some ways, but yeah, I think we'll see him on a KTM in 2026 and 2027 with the new format, the new rules, the new everything. Brad out of contract. I know you're talking about his age. I don't think it's much of an issue if I look at Marquez, which we'll talk about just now, doing what Marc is doing at pretty much a similar age. There's Brad's fit enough, mentally strong enough to carry on racing for a very long time. So at this point in time, no, Timothy, unfortunately, Brad will be on a KTM, I think, for the length of his contract. Paul, let's move on from the KTM thing, because despite the depression that is the KTM, or the frustration, I should say, again, that word, of the KTM situation, it was actually a really good weekend for MotoGP. We had a couple of what people called boring. I'll never call MotoGP boring, I don't think, because I can just appreciate these guys riding the bikes as fast as they do, and the technology and everything that's involved. There's things you can pull out of it that make it not boring, but certainly one of the more exciting sprint and main races. And it's kind of like that Phillip Island track, Qatar, because of the low grip and tire management, and everyone seems to like the layout, and it seems to suit a lot more characteristics of bikes and rider styles. It definitely does bring more people into play. So the racing was really good. One topic that I picked out of the weekend is Pecco Bagnaia. Now, he came out on Sunday, finished second, obviously got promoted after Vinales, so technically finished third, got beaten by KTM, which, before the tire penalty rule came in, I went, geez, that's Pecco. Oh God, my bad. That's not good. That's not good for the resume. Maverick Vinales on a Tech 3 KTM. That's But anyway, then he made the big call. He got second. But I loved his honesty again. Came out and said, if I can do it on a Sunday, I've got to sort myself out on Saturday. Didn't blame the team. Didn't blame anyone. Said it's me. I get into the situation where I qualify bad. I'm in a group of riders and I just don't seem to be able to pass. I don't have the feeling to pass, and that could be, again, Pecco's normally out front and he can manage his tire pressure better. Now in a group, the tire pressure goes up. Maybe does the Aero suck him in and he feels uncomfortable? Whatever it is, Pecco feels more uncomfortable in that kind of pressure cooker, again, for lack of a better word, environment, which is sprint races, because everyone's mentality is now, we don't have to worry about tires, we just got to do this. Whereas in a Sunday sprint race, they all go to that different mentality and we've got to be careful and tire management, and that's where Pecco gets it right and thrives when that bit more of a thought process is. So I like the fact that he took responsibility there. I then picked it apart a little bit more and went, the biggest problem other than Marc Marquez this year that Pecco is going to have is he's always, or certainly for the last couple of years that he's won his world titles, he's always been on that one Ducati, one level up. So when he got a 22, everyone else was on 21s pretty much, other than his teammate and the Martins and one or two other bikes, the guys that were his main rivals, 23 the same. 24 last year was a good one for Pecco because the GP23 was an iffy bike. You know what I mean? Okay, Marc made it work, but Alex, if you look at Alex Marquez now compared to then, battled. Digi kind of made it work now and then. Frankie Frankie was on a full factory bike, but Martin made it work. This year, Pecco's dealing with 6 GP24s, the best. Okay, I know he's GP24 point something with a bit of 25 in it. But as Aldeguer, Digi, Alex Marquez, you've now got 5 other riders on the exact same brilliant Ducati that you're on that you've got to beat. And that's where I think he's going to come unstuck a couple, especially in the sprint situation where Firmin Aldeguer is going to go just gung ho. Well, I've got nothing to. And Alex Marquez, what has Alex Marquez got to lose? We all think he's going to finish 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th in the championship. So what's he got to lose? He doesn't have to play this championship game and this thinking game and this, watch out for this and don't. He doesn't have to play that. Frankie Morbidelli doesn't have to play that because, again, he's a 5th, 6th, 7th. No one expects him to kind of shine. This is Pecco's biggest problem. When I kind of analyzed it like that, I went, geez, bud, you don't have that upper hand really anymore in terms of technology and bike. You still got the factory backing and how quickly, as Marc says, how quickly they can make changes, especially with electronics. Like Marc, that's what's blown Marc's mind with his factory Ducati team is how quickly they can make a change and how positive and reactive that team is. They've got a 3D printer sitting outside, so if they want to print up a new something, they, just how reactive this place is. But Pecco, I'm not saying that he hasn't been a worthy champion. We know how worthy of a champion he is. But I just looked at that sprint race, especially, and that main race. There's going to be races where he's going to have these GP24s right on his tail. And he's, last year he had to really just deal with Martin and a Marc on a 23, but he knew he had the upper hand. Every single Ducati rider that climbs on that bike this year, I mean, I would love to know, well, we do know, just the mental edge that you have over everyone else. Brad, Maverick, Zarco, Fabio, all those other riders are climbing on their bike going, okay, I hope this works. God, I hope I'm going to do something here. Whereas those GP24 guys, Firmin Aldeguer is climbing on that bike and going, I don't even care. I'm not going to even do any development here. You just put whatever Pecco's settings were in and I'm going to go. What more do I know? I don't know any better than Pecco. Put that setting in and I'm just going to go ride this bike as fast as I can. And that can you imagine that mental edge that you've got sitting on a Ducati compared to everyone else? So that's going to be, for me, other than Marc Marquez, trying to manage Marc now and his speed. Pecco's can't just worry about Marc. At the beginning of the year, we all thought, right, that's his main focus. Well, it's not anymore. Alex Marquez has proved it. Firmin Aldeguer proved it again. Had another fantastic weekend. So, interesting.
Yeah, and I think, Rob, after last year where he got beaten so often by Martin in the sprint races, and then he would recover, or he'd crash in the sprint, then he would recover. Pecco, that is so well on a Sunday. And we always said, we know he can do that. That was okay against Martin. It didn't work out well for him at the end of the year. He lost the championship. However, I think it's a different kettle of fish with that mentality of saying, well, Saturday's okay, but Sunday's my day. He now has to say, I've got to get get the maximum amount out of qualifying and out of Saturday sprint and not just focus on Sunday. I think, as you rightly said, the other Ducatis, Morbidelli surprised me. He's been very competitive. Digi's been very unlucky. Alex Marquez has been way more competitive than we ever thought he would have been. So Pecco, certainly, he's going to have another mind shift, and I think he's very good at that. But he's going to have to now, from next week in Spain, he's going to have to say, Saturday afternoon is equally as important now as Sunday, because you can't keep throwing away those, even if it is a 6 or 8 point difference every week to Marc this week, someone else next week. And, because by the time they get to 4 races to go, he's going to be 3 races in points behind, and he won't make that up. So I certainly think his mind, but he's very good at that. He processes. He might not jump up and down, but he certainly, I think his mind and his processing ability is top notch. So he needs to do that, but he can't wait another 4 races. This coming weekend in Spain, he has to now say, sprint races are my thing. I've got to be like a Marc Marquez, like a Martin was last year. Flat out, from when that flag drops or the robot changes to green till the flag drops, I've got to be on it all the time. No excuse of this tank's wrong, because that's something that I can't understand. He says with a smaller tank, he can't ride the bike. But surely they're sticking to that, I think it's a 158 kilo weight limit. Yes. Surely they stick to that, whether they got the smaller tank on or not. I wouldn't know, but that's what I would imagine. They have ways to add or subtract weight from the bike. So that, I don't know if that sits with me. Maybe the movement of the fuel when the bike is on a Sunday with the full tank for the longer race. Maybe he prefers that to the, I don't know, but he needs to certainly make a mind shift, because his speed, we see it on a Sunday, the speed is there. It's that Saturday where at the moment is going to be his downfall to, I don't think he's going to beat Marc this year, all things being equal, but if anything, that's going to be his downfall for not doing it, is the results he gets Saturday morning in qualifying and Saturday afternoon in the sprint race.
We talk about it, but we're talking about a guy that won the most sprints. He won more sprint races than Martin last year. And that's purely why I think it's a mental thing. I think, especially when qualifying doesn't go his way.
Yeah,
I think that's the main thing. Pecco needs his Friday to go to plan, and he needs his Saturday morning to go to plan. And if it doesn't go to plan, it kind of rattles the ship a bit. And then he goes into this protection mode for the sprint race. Just finish. Just don't crash. Just get points. And then he comes out afterwards and says, I'm going to pass 10 guys on the first lap in the Sunday race. And it's like, well, why don't you have that mentality for the sprint race? So I think it's, I think the tank and everything, that's what professional athletes do, especially bike races. You start pulling things. It's not, could it be that? Could it be that? You start finding excuses in a way. And I could see Pecco almost come back to it and go, you know what? It's none of that. It's me. If I can do it on a Sunday, I must do it on a Saturday. And that's pretty much what he ended off with. And so, I appreciated that about him. The comment here with Jonathan, Tommy Tucker, Marc, how's it, Uncle Rob and Paul? The GP3 23 couldn't be that cuck if Pecco took a championship on it. Just a thought. It wasn't cuck because he won the championship. But if you remember how that season started, Pecco didn't like it. And, same with the 24. But again, he was competing against guys on GP22s most of the time, and KTMs that were temperamental, and Yamaha that could only really be ridden by Fabio Quartararo, and that. So a couple of pieces fell in the puzzle. As I said, I'm not discounting any of Pecco's titles. He won them fair and square, and he was the best rider in those situations. I'm just saying now, looking at the GP24s, especially how Fermin Aldeguer, who, yes, he's a fantastic, young, talented rider. We all know that. 19 years old, just turning 20 now, fantastic rider. Should not be hopping on a MotoGP bike and beating Bastianini, Vinales, Alex Marquez, Brad Binder. It shouldn't be happening. It shouldn't be happening at the level that we have now. But it is because, as I said, the mindset thing, that mentality of hopping on a bike that is just sorted. This thing is sorted. I don't have to do anything. Plug that setting in, plug and play, and off we go. And while they're just worrying about lap times, the KTM and Yamaha, everyone else is worrying about how the bike's feeling, vibration, chatter, this new part, this. So it's a different world. And Olimoto mentioned earlier a good point about, put them all on the, if you put every rider on the grid on a GP25, Marc Marquez would still be winning practically all the races. He's just that much better. And I agree with that. But can you imagine if everyone was on the same motorcycle on a GP24 or 25 and they all had that feeling? Can you imagine the racing? I do agree. I think Marc would still have the edge. And I think he proved it this weekend with how he managed the race. We'll talk about that just now. But can you imagine? You would have a Brad, a Pedro Costa, Vinales, Bastianini back on it. Morbidelli would be there. Bezzecchi would be in there. You would just have this mammoth group. You would have races where the rider finishing in last would be 10 seconds behind in a main race. Not 20 something, because that's down to the bike. Yes, sometimes it can be the rider not suited to a track or whatever. Most of it now, with the quality of rider that we've got in this field now, it's down to bike. It's down to purely what the bike is capable of. And that really just struck me this weekend as, Pecco has now he can't just think about Marc. He's got to think about these other Frankie Morbidelli just starting the main race, which was good and bad, because I kind of went, yes, great to see that VR46 bike out front. But then at the same time, you want to slap Lost Corp Morbidelli for going, listen, man. Again, everyone knows you've got to manage your tires. What are you doing? And Marc, I could almost see Marc just laughing in his helmet, when he saw Frankie going. It was like, even when Vinales passed him, you could just see Marc kind of going, oh, this is nice. This is very cute. Even when Pecco passed, this is very cute. This is nice. You guys know what's going to happen in 10 laps time, And then, just quickly touching on Marc, we'll get into the bigger picture, but while it's in my train of thought, this is how Marc makes statements. This is how mind games. This is how Marc plays mind games. So track, Marc's not good at. He's won once there on a Honda. Oh no! Pecco's got him here. Oh no, tire wear. Last 2 laps of the race, Marc Marquez breaks a lap record.
Yeah.
Now you go, you think if you're, and this is where I really feel sorry for the likes of Brad and all these guys, because they analyze everything. You sit exhausted. You've just wrestled this orange bike or this red bike or this blue bike of Qatar. You've just wrestled this thing around. You've got arm pump. You've got a headache. You're tired. Your back sore. You're missing teeth because it's chatted and vibrated. You sit there and you read that printout at the end of the race. And they do. I've seen them.
Of course.
You analyze. You go to the lap count, and you look at Marc, and you go, "Jesus, this guy won the race, but he hasn't set the faucet." Hang on. Yeah. Well, I was going backwards on my medium Michelin. This guy's setting lap record pace on the final 2 laps of the race. Now you think what that does in here. Pecco will, even though Pecco was on the podium in second, he's got to look at that, and he visibly saw it happening. But they've all got to sit there and go, how is this possible? You were supposed to be terrible at this track. The tires are not supposed to last that long. And this is where you need to pat Michelin on the back. I know it's very easy to criticize it. They built or manufactured tires that a rider could go break lap records after 20-something laps. That was probably the most impressive thing I took out of the whole weekend. I think he broke everyone, or he certainly dented a lot of spirits with that statement.
Yeah, Rob, it just shows the mental fortitude of Marc Marquez. He didn't panic when, first of all, he said it was his mistake that Alex rode into the back of him. Didn't fluster him. Then you could actually see him slowing everyone down, because there was a queue of them behind him. But as they started getting too close, he just pulls a little bit of a gap, let Morbidelli go, didn't stress about that, because he knows you win the race in the last 3 laps, not the first 3 laps. And I think it's his mental fortitude, this more mature Marc. On the Honda, he was flat out. He would, he had just, especially his first 2 years in MotoGP, he was trying to prove a point, make a statement, win, drill everyone. Now he's saying, no, all I have to do is make sure the last, like you say, I think he set his 5 fastest laps in the last 7 laps. Mm-hmm. So that's what he says. He says, I know this track. I know what I've got to do. If someone's ahead of me, I'll try and catch them towards the end of the race. He doesn't panic. And like we said with Thailand, where he got the tire pressure warning, he knew exactly what to do. That just shows that he's on such a level, and you've got to give credit to the bike. It gives him that ability. He can just almost slow everything down in his mind. It's okay. Where are we going now? What do I have to do now? Where you might find a Bagnaia or certainly a Morbidelli, he's panicking. He's in the front. He's thinking in his head, if I can get a 4-second gap, I know I'm going to have tire drop off in the last third of the race, but it might be enough. With other guys, specifically Marquez, he's thinking, don't worry, boy, I'll get you now. I'll never let you get a 4-second gap. So it's and it just seems to be something that the bike is giving Marc an additional ability. And that's a worrying thing for the oaks that are racing against him, because it's coming very easy to Marc Marquez at the moment.
Yeah, Sven Grin got the comment, Marc was never shit at Qatar, got pipped twice by Dovi, who was on a better bike than him. And Sven, I agreed with that exactly that statement, as you're saying, heading into the weekend where people were kind of discarding Marc at Qatar. And I was like, well, I thought it was more a case of the Honda not being a great bike at Qatar. Marc, as Sven said, was always competitive there, but Maverick on a Yamaha won comfortably because the Yamaha just worked there. Dovi and the Ducati won there because it worked well there. So it was never a case of Marc being, but again, you go to the spec sheet and Marc's winning record at Qatar was nothing like at some of the other tracks. And that's kind of what everyone was holding on to. I'm sure Pecco was holding on to, Pecco had won there just last year on a Ducati, pretty much the same bike he had now. So why wouldn't he do it again? But Paul, I brought up earlier that link that you sent me that I will definitely post. I'll get my brother to post on the Motor Rider World Facebook page, because I posed the question to you and to everyone the last time we had the show, and I said, is this the best version of Marc Marquez that we've seen? And I watched that interview, and it solidified it for me. I watched that interview, and it solidified it purely on the fact that I saw this Marc sitting comfortably, relaxed, talking to this journalist like everything's off his shoulders. And the guy still said, what do you dream about? What do you still have to do? He says, nothing. I've got nothing to do. If I don't win another championship, I don't win another championship. I've achieved everything I need to achieve in life. I am just loving life. I'm loving the fact that I got another chance to go racing. I'm loving the fact that I'm being competitive. They even asked him, where would you like to see yourself in 3 years' time? Still racing? And he said, yep, in the same place. That's how confident he, not back with, Honda. Or I'm happy where I am now. But I just saw a guy that's at peace. I saw a guy that's, Wayne Taylor said earlier, self-confident. And to me, it's the best version of Marc Marquez, especially after watching that race on Sunday. Exactly what you've just said. And what he did in Thailand, and what he did in Qatar with the grid. The guy just understands everything there is. Oh, my tire pressure's not right. I'm going to back off. Oh, I'm on the wrong tires here. If I run off this grid, everyone's going to follow me. We're going to get a restart here. Sunday, okay, you got Morbidelli, you go, Vinales, you pass me, Pecco, that's cool. I'm just going to chill here, and with 5 laps to go, I'm just going to go destroy everyone. The guy is just, love him or hate him. I don't want to hear Marc Marquez or Rossi's. I don't want to hear any of that. I don't want to hear any of that. This guy is just, this is the best version of Marc Marquez.
Yeah, there's no doubt. Yeah, absolutely.
Who's going to argue with me?
Well, Rob, it's
not you with your Honda.
You can see 93 in the background. I'm not going to argue, but for the doubters, you've got to appreciate what you're seeing. I've said it for a while. I said it in probably 2014. This is the best we've ever seen. He might not break Rossi's record. I'm not saying Rossi might have the best win record, but of this generation, just like love him or hate him, Mick Doohan in the late 1980s was the best we had ever seen at that point. Then we got Rossi. Now we've got Marquez. We thought Pedro Acosta was the next one. The difference for Pedro, and I think he is in that league, the bike he's on doesn't give him that. What would he be doing on a Ducati? Well, we're not going to find that out this year, certainly. But I just think that you've got to appreciate what you're seeing. Like you say, watch what this guy does. His racecraft, his ability to deal with, when I say issues, his brother rides into him, knocks his wing off. He says, I didn't even notice that. He has the ability to process and say, okay, now what do we do? Off we go. And that's what, especially in a sport where speed is the criteria, things are happening so fast. He has the ability, and it seems like, as I say, they can slow things down. I mean, he's working as fast and as hard as everyone else, but things seem to happen in slow motion for these ultra.
Yes.
I don't know how you explain him. I think Rossi was exactly the same. The Duans, the Wayne Rainey's. They just have that, man, it's a seventh sense that a guy like Johan Zarco doesn't possess. As fast as Zarco is, he just hasn't got that, whatever it might be. Yes. And that's the difference. And so I appreciate what you've seen with Marquez. You don't have to be a fan of his, but make no mistake, he's special. There's no doubt about it.
Absolutely. Olimoto kind of summed it up perfectly, as you did. A couple of people in the comments here. Rainer Albrecht is causing all kinds of nonsense again. But Robbo, it's the bike. And listen, you can shy away from it as much as you want. As Rossi changed MotoGP, Marquez has had his impact. Casey Stoner had his impact. They got labeled aliens for that because there's no other way to explain them. Correct. There's no other way to explain them other than they're just not from this planet. What they do and how they do it, they're just not from this planet. Olimoto, the one thing I will kind of disagree with Olimoto is where he says he's got by far the best bike and there are no riders like Rossi and Lorenzo. I can understand what you're saying there.
Listen, but Rob, in all fairness, Lorenzo, Rossi, Stoner, and then Marquez were the aliens.
Yes.
Right now, if you're honest with yourself right now, Marquez is the only alien. Pecco, I wouldn't put him in that category. He had and neither Martin, even Martin of last year, would you consider him to have been an alien? No. Those four guys, when they were racing, they dominated. Almost any weekend, it was only those four. Maybe Danny Pedrosa to a lesser degree, but even him, I don't think he ever really qualified. So I'm 100% Marc is on the best bike, but when you put the best rider on the best bike in the best team, which Ducati have shown that over the last 4 seasons, without a doubt, it's the best team, the factory team. That's the result you get. You can't blame Marquez for that. He most certainly earned his position to get there. But I'm not disputing that if he had stayed with Honda, he certainly wouldn't be getting the results he's getting. He might be, I think he'd be beating Zarco, but at what cost? How many crashes would he have had? What injuries might he have occurred? So, I'm not disputing the fact for 1 second. But when you go back to when Rossi was winning, the Yamaha was the best bike. He even jumped on the Ducati. Look what happened there. He went back to the Yamaha. Maybe initially, and look at him when he got on the Honda, the 2001, I think it was, the first 4-stroke year. He just smashed everyone. He was the best rider on the best bike in the best team. So, and you can't say, but Rossi had a better bike. There were other Hondas in the field. He drilled them. So, it's a thing you could debate forever. But we're talking now. There is no Rossi. There is no Lorenzo in the field. No Casey Stoner. So what you're seeing now is someone who just happens to be, 0.2 of a second better than everyone else as an average. He's probably going to have a few tracks where he's going to get beaten, but it's going to be less so than more so.
Robert Mackey, I like that comment. It is. It's just, as I said, I know like Olimoto and a couple of people say, it was boring seeing one alien and Marc Marquez winning pole position, fastest lap, sprint race. Sure. I still wouldn't use the word boring. I can understand, you want more excitement. We want to see Maverick Vinales passing. It was brilliant to see, and we want to see all of that. I sit on that couch and I just appreciate it. I just appreciate how this and what this guy does. Just like Toprak, Cosmic Surface is Toprak. Toprak's not an alien, I don't think. And Andre Calvert says, you got the likes. Look what Vinales did on a pogo stick this weekend and stuff. What made them aliens was exactly like what you said, Paul. They were there week in, week out, rain, snow, sleet, Bridgestones, Michelin, this, that. Those guys were in the top 3 of the championship. In a shit year, they were top 3. They were just always there. The Vinales is a fantastic rider. But as I was trying to say with Pedrosa, what made him not an alien was the fact he never won a world title. In MotoGP, I'm talking. All the other guys did. Vinales will never win a MotoGP title. I would put my house on that. Yes, this weekend I would, and I've said it time and time again, I would love to see that Maverick come out. That Maverick that destroyed people on the Yamaha, that Maverick that was competitive on a Suzuki in MotoGP, that Maverick that is on Facebook that you hear everyone talk about, Simon Crayford, everyone in the know that talks about that raw talent.
Yeah,
that was the
absolutely.
and that was the positive. That's what I enjoyed seeing. I don't like. It worries me hearing the kid in the candy store and he's a kid, and that worries me because that's what lets Maverick down. But there's no doubt they all have the ability. As I said, you look what Brad Binder did in Brno in those tricky conditions. To do that, you're a supreme talent. But it's that spec sheet of the achievements that Marc, Rossi, Stoner have, Lorenzo have, that put them on that status, and that's the biggest difference. We're only 4 race meets in this. What's Andre? And Andre's got a point here. I'm not going to dismiss it. We are only 4 race meets in. This is the first time Pecco has this kind of competition. So let's see if he can up his game for the near future. And it's hard to not get carried away, because as I said, it feels like we've already had a long season. It does have that feel to it for some reason, and it is easy to get carried away with Marc and how brilliant he is. And there are going to be weekends like we saw in Qatar where he's going to be dominant, but there's going to be mistakes made, or there's going to be tougher weekends for him where he can't quite be as calculated as he wants, and maybe the Ducati, he can't figure out some of the problems. They're going to be very few and far between. Pecco, we know, has got a chink in his armor. They've all got chinks in their armor. But, Martin's not a factor. We'll talk about him just now. The KTMs aren't really a factor. The Yamaha's not a factor. The Honda's not a factor. You know what I mean? So who's Marc got to really beat? He's got to beat a Pecco Bagnaia. And Pecco Bagnaia has got these sprint races in him. And in many ways, he's already got his card with what he did on Sunday in Qatar. He managed the race, and with 5 laps to go, as you said, he just fast lapped. While Pecco was struggling, everyone else on the planet was struggling, Marc was just going faster. I mean, this is why what's his name? Delinia and that whole team, this is why they chose him over Jorge Martin. If you want any more proof, this is why Delinia just rubbed his hands. There were all those caricatures going around and everything of Delinia. There were some very graphic ones, but this is exactly why. He's got this 8-time world champion at the Oli Motor said it earlier, at his most maturest. That was the only thing really missing of the Marquez before. He did these stupid immature things, riding into people, pushing the limit, trying to find big crashes. You don't see this kid anymore. That kid part, and this is what frustrates me about Vinales. We shouldn't be talking about kids in MotoGP. Not this confident, mature Marc. I don't know how. I honestly don't know. I'm sitting looking at this going, how are you going to beat this guy? Yeah, there's going to be races where you're going to compete against him. But how are you going to beat this guy for the rest of the year? Yeah, people talk about Jerez, and Marc's fast at Jerez. Where's Marc not fast? Tell me where Marc is fast. This is what it's going to... It's the most boring season in recent history, Johnny Martin's. Maybe in terms of overtakes and stuff, but in terms of quality and speed and maturity and just downright awesomeness, it's probably the most exciting in my book.
Yeah, well, listen, I do agree with that comment, but that's because of the Aero packages and the restrictive electronics. So
early enough,
there's mitigating circumstances to that. I think if we had bikes, and I saw a photo popped up on social media of Davies, I think it was his 2013 bike, the year before Aero. And you must see how slimline. It's magnificent. No, man.
Yeah,
it's
I don't know. I think it's horrible.
If we went back to that era with this horsepower,
let
me tell you, it would be a different kettle of fish. You'd still see the same guys winning, no matter what. So, all the true champions, the Rossis, the Stoners, maybe less so Stoner. He really only shone in MotoGP. He didn't win 125s. He didn't win 250 World Championships. Where Rossi, Marquez, Pedro Acosta, they've won all through. But I think the bikes, the Aero, which I don't follow Formula One, but you've certainly seen it. The overtaking is limited because of the Aero effects. And the bikes are getting to that point where, you're only seeing 1 or 2 overtakes, not like we used to. But that's not going to change until 2027. And then it's only a reduction in Aero. It's not a get rid of it. So we've got to live with this. The the sport has created its own worst enemy here, or its own monster. And it's not easy to just say, okay, well, tomorrow we're taking it all off. 10 years ago, top speeds were probably at 330, maybe 340. 365 Ks an hour with no aero, that bike could be very unstable, and then it becomes a risk. So it's such a catch-22. So, Johnny, I agree with your comment, but I also disagree. But I think that the MotoGP paddock has created that problem all on its own. And it was Ducati who started it, absolutely no doubt. But they've been at the forefront, and that's why they are where they are.
Yeah, listen, like I said, that just pushed the boundaries of what was written in the rule book. So they didn't do anything illegal. But I am excited for 2027. I do, part of me does kind of wish they still stayed 1000cc, because I think, what made Casey Stoner the massive success that he was that pure fact. You hopped on a motorcycle that had good electronics and whatever, but the rider made the difference. And we've spoken about this many times. The rider made the difference. And that was the era where the rider could make the difference. Now, again, not wanting to go on with Ayagura and Fermin Aldeguer and stuff. You didn't, other than Marc Marquez back in the day, you didn't see rookies climbing into MotoGP and performing, because there was so much to learn. There was so much to take on. Now it's, okay, well, you're climbing on a bike that does almost 70, 80% of the work in some way. You just got to be that extra 30% or something. So it is. I am looking for it. I saw that exact picture you're talking about, and I cringed, to be honest. I went, oh no, that looks terrible. I like a bit of wing in that now, but I don't like this overkill that they've gone with now. Like I said, especially KTM with that rear end and everything. So I'm looking to 2027, and I think that's going to be a nice added boost. It's going to be a refresh, and I just hope that the others will be on a similar level, especially the likes of KTM, and that I still think that Ducati will have the upper hand. They have to with where they are, and certainly having the Marc Marquez's and everything. But it's certainly going to be a welcomed refresh. Let's put it that way. Paul,
interesting on that point. This coming weekend, Yamaha are debuting their V4. So they'll be testing it this weekend with and not Fermin Aldeguer, Fernandez. Yeah, they'll be test riding it. So it'll be interesting to see. Oh, and I think Dovi's going to be there.
Yes.
Because he's also, so that's interesting that they're heading down that line. So nice to know that things are happening, because there's been talk about it. I don't think they're allowed to race it this year, but possibly because they get concessions. So,
maybe. I know engines have been frozen, but
but not for them, Remember, if you've got concessions, your engines are still open, So maybe whether they can run a completely new engine, I don't know. But this weekend be interesting to, on all the news channels, probably Monday, the crash.net and Bike News, they'll have all the interviews and updates. It'll be very interesting to see what the feedback is, especially for Fernandez, who's riding the current bike, to jump on that and then say, okay, well, now let me tell you, this bike does this, and this. It'll be a great comparison for him to make.
I love this comment from Olimoto, and this is the only reason. If Marc does this, I'll buy a Marc Marquez cap and I'll put it on my wall like here, Paul. Marc should do
I want Johnny Martins to do that.
Johnny Martins and Olimoto have got to do it. Marc should do the fair thing and stop bikes with Brad. It's only right. Marquez is too good to have the best bike, and Brad deserves it for his patience with KTM. I love that.
You should just paint it orange and not tell anyone.
Yeah, and just go and destroy the field again. Paul, another talking point that was raised, certainly for me, I don't think it's been blown up as much as previous incidents in that, but it looked like one to me. Alex Marquez, we know the fantastic season he's had so far, another brilliant sprint race. Marquez 1-2 again. You kind of thought, oh, this is ominous for Sunday's race, because Alex has really turned a corner. You have to give praise where praise is due, and he's done a fantastic job. But Sunday the wheels came off a bit. Sunday, bit of the kind of, I want to use the word Loskop again. Alex Marquez came into play, and it was a bit frustrating because it was silliness. And I take my hat off to Alex Marquez. He came out and he said it was silly, and he manned up to it. I'm enjoying Alex Marquez. I must say, I'm really liking the Alex Marquez that I hear and see the things that he's doing. And I never really thought I'd ever say that, but I am. But one long lap penalty for just riding into the side of someone, destroying his race. And I do feel for Digi. We'll talk about him after this, but there's this question of a 1-lap penalty. Is that enough? You've got to, and I'm sure Simon Crayford and them also did it, but for me, you've got to take into where it happened. Like if I look at Fermin Aldeguer, I think it was in Argentina, where he took out Oliveira. Slow corner, under braking, or slower corner, under braking, easy to tuck the front, and just one of those racing incidents kind of moves. This is going into one of the fastest right-handers probably on the calendar, certainly on the track, in a situation where it's very one-lined. You see the odd pass happen there, but the rider always runs wide because they're all going to go in there at the same speed. It's a very tricky corner, and it's not one you really want to fool around with or disrespect. And I just think Alex Marquez, I've watched it so many times over, and I don't know if it's the Aero that sucks him in, but I don't want to say attempted murder. I mean, that's harsh, but it was just, he just rides straight to the side of DJ. And if that could have and probably should have ended a lot worse. So I was hoping for a harsher penalty to kind of really put it in the mind of guys. Like, listen, guys, there's corners where you can take chances and do things, and there's corners where you can't. And that's one of the areas and corners that you just don't.
And I mean, he knows it. He's on the track. He knows if he was in front, he'd be thinking, well, I hope nobody hits me from behind.
Yeah.
I think, and also I watched it a couple of times. It was a brain fade moment. Unless the Aero did suck him in, which is also, he knows that. He's been behind other bikes there many times over this weekend, if nothing else. So I think it was definitely a bit of a brain fart moment. The punishment certainly didn't fit the crime. I think what they need to address. So he was on the inside. He punted Digi went wide, went to kind of the back of the grid. And Alex served a long lap penalty. On that track, the long lap penalty is about a 3-second penalty, maybe 4 seconds.
Yeah.
DG suffered about a 9-second penalty. I think what they should say is a long lap penalty after you've dropped behind the guy you punted, if he's still on the track. Because DG wouldn't have been where he was if it wasn't for Alex Marquez, no doubt. So presuming, like with Oliveira and Aldeguer, you can't say drop behind Oliveira's crashed. Then he gets a double long lap penalty. Yeah. Or you drop. So I think that's something they need to look at. I firmly agree. And I watched it and I thought, he got off lightly because what did he lose? 4 places, made up 3 of them, and then got the place back from Maverick. And then I heard the interview with Darryn Antonio where he said, that's just not right. I'm the one who gets shunted to the back. I certainly had podium pace, maybe not race-winning pace. Yes. And Alex gets off with a 3-second slap on the wrist or 4. Then I thought, what they should do is, okay, the oak you punted is on the track, but he's lost because of you. Drop behind him, and then you serve your long lap penalty. In some situations, because it was such a fast corner, getting pushed wide, you lose way more time than if it's a slow first or second gear corner. You might lose 2 or 3 places, cut back in again. So because it was at a fast section of the track and early on in the race, you lose a lot of position. I think that could be something they should look at. Even a double long lap penalty, it would have dropped him another 3 places back, possibly. He would have still been ahead of Darryn Antonio, where he was behind him when he rode into him, and he stayed in front of him by a long shot for the rest of the race. Yeah, I do agree. Not his greatest moment. And he needs to just control himself. I mean, if nothing else, he messed up his own race. He probably would have finished probably 3rd or 4th, eh?
Yeah.
So, but definitely, I think he certainly got a slap on the wrist. And I'm going to be a bit controversial here and go to what he did in Spain last year, where he took out, which depends which side of the fence you sit. Took out Pecco, whatever it is. It was Alex, and it's a similar kind of thing where, just they need to watch him a little bit. I'm not saying he's a troublemaker or he's an idiot, but, just maybe call him aside and say, Alex, just settle down, please. Just, lives are at stake here without being over dramatic about it.
Yeah, I do. And like you said, it did spoil the race because we had 2 riders there in Alex and Digi that would have been with the Pecco, the Morbidelli, the Zarco, and we would have had a 4-5-1 battle. Who knows? I still don't think they would have had anything for Marc, but certainly it would have entertained the race a bit more. But as you said, I like that idea. I've never thought of it like that, and it's got to be looked at that. My biggest frustration when I was racing, I had similar incidents a couple of times like that, where just felt like, and there were no penalties back in the day like that. The guy just carried on with it. And Cam Peterson was actually one of them in Cape Town. And I just thought, how bollocks is this? This guy's kind of just used me as a berm.
Yeah.
My whole race weekend, all my hard work, my travel money, my everything that I've got to get here and do is now, for this guy's braid fade is now just, all over. And where's the
drain?
that punishment could be interesting. I think it would be a tricky one to manage every single time. Okay, tell the oak now pull over and ride slowly and wait for the oak at the back of the grid. But I do think a harsher penalty or add, as you said, that 9 seconds. Cool. We take your long lap and then we're adding 9 seconds.
Yeah. Or if the penalty is that harsh, then instead of a long lap penalty, a ride through the pits, because that also is very restrictive.
Exactly. So yeah, I do think it was. Yeah, I think this is what Alex is going to have to address and learn now. You are a championship contender. You're a front runner now. This kind of stuff, I suppose, we never really got to see it, but that was the hard kind of racing that was happening mid-pack, towards the end of the field in the past couple of seasons. We all just looked at the front guys. There was good hard racing happening in the middle. This is what happens. These guys were battling. Alex has got to understand now, and it's the same problem that could almost be attached to the Pecco argument I had earlier. You're trying to overtake someone on the same machinery as you, the same speed. It's like the whole shot device. Dave Peterson, when I did the chat with him a while ago now, that's the biggest problem with this turn going into turn one now. You've got 22 riders going into turn one at the same speed because of the ride-out device and the start device. It's not like the old day where one could have 3-second lead into turn one because he knew how to launch a bike. And this is the problem that Alex and them are all going to, Alex certainly, I think, has to realize to himself, right, you're a top contender now. You're in the hunt against these really fast guys now, at that level. You're going to have to start, I want to say, acting like that, because I think he knows how to do that. He's a 2-time world champion and he's a professional racer. But you're in that environment now. You can't just now, you're not 3 seconds faster than a KTM and you can just bomb him. That was Digi on the same bike as you, doing the same speed, if not better. You're going to have to manage those situations better.
And also, he's got to be very careful that his mindset wasn't, hey, I'm ahead of you in the championship, I can just do what I want. He's also got to be mindful that there's that arrogance, if that's the right word, that he can't say, well, I'm second in the championship. I deserve to be in front of you. Yes, he deserves to be in front of him if he passes fair and square at the end of the start, finish straight like Maverick did to Marc. Clean pass, no issues. So he's got to be mindful now, as you say. He's a championship contender, but he's dealing with guys that are his peers, his equals in terms of speed and machine capability. So, he just needs to that little the Morbidelli moment must just move to the back of his brain a little bit.
Touching on Morbidelli quickly, good weekend, another top 3, promoted onto the podium from the Vinales thing. Zarco, let's quickly touch on Zarco and Honda because it is a big topic and Zarco deserves a massive pat on the back. We're not going to go on about it too much, but it definitely needs a little bit of time in the spotlight. Top performing Honda again. There is this talk, and I don't like it when this talk comes because I don't want anything to distract or get in the way. There's nothing wrong with Zarco in that LCR team. Again, I talk about environment, and there's this talk Zarco must go to the factory team. And if it's working in that environment, leave it. Cecchinello creates that nice environment. It's kind of like what I was saying with Pedro Acosta, thriving in the Tech 3 team, not having the same feeling in the factory team. Don't upset the apple cart now. Keep it as it is. Whether he's in LCR colors or HRC colors, it clearly makes no difference. If anything, the LCR colors are benefiting him more. Stay there. Let this talk of Pedro Acosta and Toprak Razgadioglu climbing into this dream factory team for next year, let them go there. You know where you are in your point in your career. You're not going to be a MotoGP world champion. No disrespect to him. You're making the best of every race meeting. And he certainly is doing that. He's been the leader for Honda. I think Marini is certainly having his impact, got another good result inside the top 10 for Luca Marini. But credit to Zarco for kind of bringing this project up because whatever he's doing, it's working and he's putting his name in the hat and he's putting his name in the hat for the HRC ride. deservedly so. But how many times have we seen this play out? Where it's that move gets made, same kind of it Martin in many ways. It's like, what was wrong with Pramac? What was wrong with Pramac Ducati? You won the world title there. Yeah, I know the factory seat sounds great. It's not like 10, 15, 20 years ago where there was this massive divide. It's not like that anymore, So yeah, I love what Zarco's doing. I just don't want anything to upset that rhythm.
Yeah, I echo that sentiment 100%. And specifically now, and for those who haven't read the stories, heard the rumors, I don't know where you've been for the last 4 or 5 days, but the Pedro Acosta story and Toprak, the big talk is that they're at the top of Honda's shopping list. Yeah. Zarco mustn't let that now become a point where he starts thinking to himself, yes, now am I going to get booted? Am I not going to get that seat? Exactly what you say. The example that you highlight of Pedro in the team, Alex Marquez, Marc last year in Grassini, the VR46 environment, it might just be what's working for Zarco, because certainly whatever they're doing, it is working. It's also working for Marini, and I'd say Mir, okay, we know Mir had health issues this weekend, but certainly it's looking way better. So why would they ever think of upsetting the apple cart? So I echo that sentiment 100%.
And talking about that quickly, as Olimoto just get Toprak to MotoGP already, which I can't agree anymore with. It does seem, like the reality of that move potentially is going to look like Toprak's going to be on a World Superbike Honda for next year, obviously on big money, big contract, trying to improve that package, potentially go for a World Superbike title, while also testing the 2027 prototype, ready to be a full factory Honda MotoGP rider in 2027. Pirelli tires, which he knows obviously from World Superbike, and on more of a level playing field in terms of, well, this is the first time everyone, in fact, a heads up, because he'll have all that testing time. Makes sense to me in many ways, and I can see the possibility of that route happening. I can see Honda potentially getting Pedro Acosta. I think that's their main target for next year already, getting him into that HRC deal, and then potentially keeping a Mir or a Marini for, at this point in time, Marini is the more value for money, to be honest, even though Mir's the Foster bigger name with his world champion, but he's okay, he was sick this weekend, and then he had whatever he had, but it's just not working out for him. But I like the sound of that, as frustrating as, because I just want Toprak in MotoGP now, next year with whoever. But I do think that, and looking at Toprak, especially Kenan Sofoglu, how calculated he is, he doesn't want to throw Toprak into any kind of environment where he's almost set to fail, if you know what I mean. One thing is for sure, 100%, Toprak will not be on a BMW. It's just not. They're already talking about Remy Gardner's going to replace him in that team for next year. So that is a no-brainer. That's done. It's whether or not Toprak wants to do another season in World Superbikes, trying to improve this Honda package, which is now on Öhlins in World Superbike. So, on the weekend in Assen, they still beat him in race 2. Ikalakawana beat him in race 2, and Viejas had a couple of good. So a couple of little more carrots there for Toprak to entertain that Honda World. Last year there was nothing entertaining about that ride. Yeah. Anton Franikak says here, in 2027, Toprak will almost be 31 years old, younger Foster guys in the wings. I don't buy the whole age thing. It's not like 20 years ago when a 31-year-old was beaten up and old and dry and not fit. Rossi went till he was 39, and in his last race he finished 9th, top 10 in a crop not dissimilar to the quality we have now. Alvaro Bautista is 42 and he's finishing on the podium in World Superbikes. These guys are finely tuned athletes. Toprak's got that. Toprak, like Brad, like Marquez, and that's one thing I also liked about the Marquez interview, is he was like, he's not talking about retirement anytime soon, where that was spoken about not so long ago. So I'm not too fussed about the age, if I'm honest, to be honest, Anton. But I do like that route of World Superbikes, first rider to potentially win on 3 different manufacturers. I think he's more than capable of doing it, although he's got Nicola Bulliga, who's just blowing my mind in World Superbikes at the moment with his speed. But at the same time, I think Yamaha are desperate for someone like Toprak. I think they are desperate for someone like him next year. You know, talking about them. Yeah, Fabio another 7th and was competitive in the sprint race. Kind of wasn't really in the race, in the main race. Alex Rins is just, you know, off the radar. Jack Miller had a terrible weekend. Oliveira's out the picture. So they desperately need him. But yeah, I can see that Honda deal definitely happening. And if it does, that's again just Honda stepping in the right direction. I know a couple of people talk about younger Foster riders coming, but there are going to be a lot of seats up, up for grabs in the not too distant future. And exactly like what I just said, there's really good seats because a Pramac Yamaha satellite, it's a full factory team. It's not a bad team to go. The Trackhouse Aprilia team, Iagura is proving that Ralph Fernandez is taking up a really good seat. You know, so yeah, there's going to be plenty of hot seats going around and plenty of good riders to fill them.
Yeah, I think that the talk is just so loud at the moment with Toprak and Pedro because certainly people are seeing improvements away from the KTM fold for Pedro. So I think that decisions are going to be made because it's almost, and I don't think this is the scenario, but it almost seems like Honda might have 2 draw cards in that they offer to Toprak with the World Superbike and then MotoGP 2027. Gets him in and he'll be on a bike. He can test it next year. He'll have an advantage. And then Pedro coming to Honda, if he does for next year, that means the end of next year, they move Marini out if he was the rider to stay and Toprak moves straight in. Zarco stays where he is. So the pieces of the puzzle could fall into place. Yes. Why I say the talk is so loud and it's being shouted, there's nothing about Toprak or Pedro. Pedro is talking to Valentino Rossi. There's no doubt. They were saying that's why Rossi was at Qatar, was to talk to Pedro Acosta. That's what Matt Burt was saying. Other than that, it's quiet. There's no talk about an Aprilia ride, and we know Trackhouse, they must be desperate to get rid of Raul Fernandez. Toprak, same story. No talks with Yamaha. Remember, that was his previous employer. I think that relationship is soured. So I think this Honda story for both those 2 riders, there's definitely a hell of a lot of fire under that smoke. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see. But part of me agrees with you. I would like to see Toprak on these bikes next year, just to see how he would feature. But the stepping stone might be the correct way to do it. And one thing's for sure, Kenan Sofoglu is going to make sure that he walks away with the best deal for Toprak, 100%. He seems to me to be the kind of guy who he'll put whatever it takes on the line to get Toprak what he needs. So it'll be very interesting. I think this deal, whichever way it goes for him and Acosta, will be done by Mugello, which is kind of mid-May.
I think that's probably the biggest drawback for Toprak is the not getting to race competitively the current crop of MotoGP bikes. But again, the deal could be cool. Test the prototype, but then you can also do wild cards on current bike. So there's lots of carrots and
there's options
things that'll make that happen. Toprak on an Aprilia would be dangerous there from the great 481. I think and I'm not saying Toprak's going to walk into MotoGP and destroy everyone. It's not going to happen. He will be competitive, I have no doubt, on the right machine, anything but a KTM. But he's proven himself in that World Superbike paddock now. He needs to make the move. For me, Johnny Ray should have done the same years and years and years ago, and he never. And that'll always be a regret. No matter what he says, it'll always be a regret that he never went and got to compete against the world's best. Paul, before we get into a little bit of Ruche Moodley and Darryn Binder to end the show, I'm not going to really dive too much into Quartararo and that because it's kind of the same conversations we can have for days about them. Jorge Martin was a huge topic. The champ coming back, number 1 Aprilia, looked great. We need him there. We want him there to be competitive. It was always going to be a really hard one. But the script was come back. It's going to be testing for you, Jorge Martin, and you've got to treat it that way. Which is hard for a guy like Martin. That saying that to a guy like Martin is like putting Jennifer Aniston from Friends in her prime in a room naked and saying, "Listen, you're not allowed in there." It's you know what I mean. It's how do you say no? How do you?
That's a perfect analogy, Rob.
Yeah, but it is. That's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
So I feel for him. What the guy's done. Same with Darryn Binder and Brad in many ways. How many black cats have run in front of him? Anyway, there was this glimpse in the sprint race that, when he passed Pecco, I was thinking, no, listen, that's also where my mind got ticking over Pecco. Like, no, listen, Pecco, this can't happen. This just cannot happen. And Martin must have been grinning ear to ear because he almost did that and then just gave up. Then he just went back. That's it. My job is achieved. Yeah, I've upset the apple cart. I've gone and done something sweet. The last thing that needed to happen was what happened in the main race. And you could put it down to many things. I mentioned earlier, potentially the front tire heating up and causing a bit of understeer in those fast turns. Martin throughout the whole weekend said, it's just not my bike. And it was never going to be. This guy's done 20 laps or 30 laps or whatever it is up until now. This is the unfortunately the doing of your mistakes that you made in testing, crashing yourself. This is where you had to just go, I literally have to treat this as testing. I've got to just ride this motorbike around and get data, get feeling, get strength, get everything kind of reset in a way. And whether it was, as I said, tire pressure or his wrist hurting him or fatigue or mental fatigue, something, he made that mistake. And it looked like if it wasn't tire pressure, it was definitely rider mistake. Going onto the curb, tucking the front. But then instead of just tucking the front and sliding away and, harmlessly sliding away and no harm, no foul, Jorge Martin's luck and DG's luck in Qatar. DG rides into him, catapults him onto those rumble strips, and now he has these 8 ribs and a punctured lung and whatever he has. Reino Albrecht kind of puts it with everything. Reino's qualified, what's it called, medical dude or whatever it's called. So he knows the ins and out of it more than I just see broken ribs but a punctured lung, and that's what I had in 2013, and it's horrible. I was in ICU for 17 days with a pipe coming out of my left lung. They were draining blood out of it, and ribs. Everyone knows who's had broken ribs, Paul. I'm sure you can't. So it's just the worst thing that could have ever happened to Martin, and it's just delayed the process anymore. I can't see him coming back for a while, and it's such a pity because I was buoyed seeing that number one out there, and it's just going to get better and better. But again, the Martin and the Aprilia exercise is just, in its entirety, other than Ayagura, Bezzecchi was kind of nowhere this weekend. So it's not a pretty picture for Aprilia. We talk about KTM. Aprilia, other than Ayagura, is not a fantastic story to tell at the moment.
Yeah, the difference is Ayagura has been reasonably consistent. KTM, you can't say that about anyone, But going back to the Martin story, and there was the debate going on, should they let an injured rider test before he comes back to see his state of fitness? Okay, so my point, I was very much for that. I think it's a very good thing going forward. The problem is if you look at what Martin did in free practice 1, qualifying, he would never have put in the effort that you put in Q1 to get into Q2. Yes. So he did that. He now goes back to them and says, no, I feel fine. Because there's no ways he's going to walk back on. And I'm talking about if you've done a pre-Qatar test somewhere. He's never going to walk. If he managed to do 10 laps at a reasonable race pace, he would never walk into there and say, listen, I think my wrist's a bit weak. He would have said, I'm sharp. I'm there next week. He's a racer. So that thing now, suddenly, I'm wondering if that is a good thing. Yes, I understand they get to ride the race bike, which you can't simulate that on a super bike of some sort. You can't. The power's just everything's too different. But he would have felt fine Friday morning and said, no, everything's okay. I'm good to race. I have an idea. I think part of it was fatigue. There could have been a problem with the tire. But I think, he suffered in the injuries he's had this year. He's had 12 fractures before this weekend. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Anyone who's broken one bone, never mind Darryn Binder who breaks his hand and 10 days after they operate on it, he's racing again. These guys are special. Now he's suddenly gone from nothing at the beginning of the year to 10 or 12 fractures, and 7-8 weeks later he wants to race. Yeah, so it's such a difficult one. He can't fly until the lung is healed.
Yep.
So he'll be in Qatar probably till Friday this week. Then, if he's lucky, then he'll get to go home. So I don't think we'll see Martin for the next. It's Jerez, and then I think it's Barcelona after that. We certainly won't see him at either of those. So disappointing, because it was good to see him there, and we need him in the field.
I think, like you said, I think this incident reiterates the fact that don't put it to a vote.
Yeah.
Dorna, you make the rule of the front, the tire pressure rule for safety. You make those rules, because don't open this to a vote. This is a safety thing. If a rider in that situation of Martin is out for that amount of time, you let them go do a test. You let him have on his bike. What advantage did Martin have to gain by going and doing testing? For goodness sake, putting on that, because this is what potentially you cannot. Lying on the bed at Kalami after my 220k an hour no brakes crash, lying on the bed, and Ricky Moraes comes to me and I say, "How's the bike? Get it ready. I'll be back later." we don't want to give up. We want to ride our motorbike. You can't listen to a word we say. You've got to protect the rider more. And in this situation, as you said, Martin was always going to go there and put on a smiley face. Do 20 push-ups for me. Please, man. These guys have so much inner strength. The Avengers wish they could have the inner strength these guys have. They will bite their tongue and you won't even notice, and they'll do 100 push-ups.
Yeah, correct.
You can't do. Marquez is perfect example as well. Just severed his arm. The next day they go put it in place, and he goes and comes on a bike. The dumbest thing that ever. So you've got to take that decision out of the rider's hands. You are going on a 2-day test, because Aprilia are sitting here now with a massive investment that they can't use because of stupidity. On the part of Dorna, I might add, because why put it to the teams? No, it's not fair. We must let the teams vote. What are the teams going to go? Yeah, of course. Don't be stupid. There's a person, there's a human being involved. Make that decision. So I think that incident needs to kind of just clarify that rule. Dorna needs to put their foot down and say, done. That is it. This is how it's going to be. If a rider's out with this injury, this specific situation, you let them ride no matter what. I think it needs to happen to protect the investment of Aprilia as well.
Yeah, correct.
To protect everyone, to protect the other riders. Martin, Digi.
Yeah, exactly. Digi could have had a big crash. Yeah.
Exactly. So, take the decision away, and Dorna needed just to put their foot down on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
sorry, Paul.
Yeah, once again, we sit with the world champion not in the field, and
Horrible.
Look, as you say, he created the problem when his exuberance of being on the new bike. He should have just wound his neck in it. But be that as it may, you can't turn back the clock. I don't think we'll see him for another 3 races.
Well, again, Rainer Albrecht saying, 2 to 3 months. If it's anything like what mine, I was nowhere near as fit and healthy and anything close to Martin or hyperbaric chambers and anything.
Correct. Yeah.
It's again something that what is there for Martin this year in Aprilia?
Yeah.
It's gone.
Yeah.
So what is the point of rushing? What is the point now of rushing back? Get this guy back, get him riding an Aprilia superbike if that's all he can ride. The guy didn't ride anything. You want a superbike or something. They've got to manage that whole situation better. I think Martin himself, Aprilia, and mainly Dorna with that. Let's end the show off talking about our other 2 South African stars, Ruche Moodley and Darryn Binder. Ruche Moodley, I can't help but applaud this young kid. Just, again, doing everything right. As we've said, we've come on the last couple of shows now, well, since his whole Moto3 career, basically. Since he had that one, the first run, we had that one big wake-up call. That kind of, someone just made him at that big crash and say, listen, this is Moto3 World Championship now. Sort yourself out. And he kind of reset himself. But the bullet, got through that race weekend, and since then has finished every single race, more points on the board, beat his teammate. His teammate was doing really well and crashed out, but that's the positive side. Just doing everything right. What a mature young kid that is just, even the commentators, even the TNT guys that I get, good praise going the way of Ruche Moodley, and deservedly so.
Well, certainly from Matt Burton, whatever the other guy's name is, certainly very, very good commentary. They always mention him. Yeah, they mentioned his teammates saying, look where Buchanan is, because I think he was up to 9th at one place. But Ruche doing exactly what you and I have said. Just finish the races, get the experience. Now he's consistently finishing in the points. And 13th, Next week it might be 12th. The week after 11th. He's certain, and you look at the names he's beating. He's beating guys with lots of experience, and that's the good part. He's not beating the 2 or 3 other rookies in the class. He's beating guys that have been there for 3 and 4 years, and that to me is the highlight. It shows that he's doing everything that is expected of him, and certainly more. So that team must be delighted with what they've signed there.
Yeah, they've really got a great investment there, and it's just things are just gonna get better. Ruche is quite a tall rider. I don't think people can really see, how tall he is from the outside. And that was always my worry going into Moto3, especially with this new age rule of 17 or 18 or whatever it is. We saw youngsters, Pedro Costas, that coming in at 15, 16, that prime. Lorenzo's and all of them back in the day in 125s. Marquez coming in at just turned 16 or 15, whatever. That was the prime for those machines. So handicapped in some ways, Ruche Moodley having to fit himself on a Moto3, but he's doing everything right. I'm really looking forward to catching up with him and the Binder brothers and everyone at Silverstone, really having a nice deep dive conversation with them and Arusha and the family as well. But just so proud of the young guy. Really.
And as we said, Rob, now he's going to Europe, and a lot of these circuits now he'll have raced on, which straight away, he's been spending probably the first 8 or 10 laps, and I know they go on the simulator and they memorize everything. It's not the same.
No.
He's been spending whatever it is, 8 or 10 laps following other guys to get the perfect lines, braking points. Now he won't have to do that. He's going to go to tracks where his first lap he'll feel comfortable. Yes. And, that's also a confidence thing. Straight away he'll be like, okay, I know exactly. I've won here. I've had a great race here. So it's just going to be fantastic. Absolutely.
Yeah, sentiments shared by Daryl Bryson. I thought brilliant comment to make is, he's been literally at tracks he's never been around in his life. Yeah. Qatar, his dad, I know, raced in Qatar for a couple of years and won some races there. Got some beautiful pictures of Arusha getting an Aprilia, all kinds of sideways there. So it would have been a nice track walk for him to give him some. Yeah. But again, it is complete fresh in the mind. And he did everything, as you said, a team would want from a rookie. Finish the race in the points, bring the bike home, yourself in one piece. Absolutely brilliant there. Paul, you cannot pass up on this opportunity. Olimoto, I'm packing my bag to go and watch Rossi race at Imola this weekend. Does Paul want to help me choose which cap to take?
I've got one here that he can take one. Olimoto, yes, my boy, I'm envious.
Yeah, that is. I'm actually at Mazzano next weekend. I'm at Mazzano. There's an Ike My Ride Fest that I've got to go work at for Zero. So I'm going to try and see if I can sneak into Tavilla if I have some free time. So looking forward to that. So that'll be great. But Olimoto, enjoy that, man. That's going to be fantastic.
And just a quick question, Olimoto, is he driving with? He drove with one of the Van der Linde brothers. I'm not sure if it's Sean or Calvin. Whoever drives for BM, they won a race or podiumed the last race they did. So he drove with, as I said, I'm not sure if it's Calvin or Sean. So I wonder if that's who he's teaming up with. Olimoto probably knows the lineup of that team. Yeah,
Olimoto will know. As much as I love Rossi, I don't follow him in car racing. I can't stand car racing. It's just not my deal. Darryn Binder. Let's talk Darryn Binder, Paul. I don't know what this poor kid's done in life. I just don't know what this poor young man has done. A couple of comments about he's on a lemon of a bike, and those Moto2 bikes really break. It's been such a great exercise for Triumph because those bikes never break. They don't. You very rarely see a DNF down to electrical or a bike fault. It was already frustrating because Qatar is a good track for Darryn. You think back on the Petronas Moto3 bike, how good he was, podium in there, nearly winning races. And Olimoto, he's driving with Calvin. So there's your answer.
Okay.
Calvin van der Linde.
Thank you. Yeah.
That was already frustrating that Darryn was carrying this injury from the last race into Qatar, a track that he loves. This was going to be the kickstart to his season. Gets there, goes through all the heartache and pain and drama of surgery, fixing himself up, medical. He was racing, then he wasn't racing, then he was racing. Gets on the bike, started the weekend off really well, looked controlled, did everything, got into Q2, got a good qualifying, got a decent start, and you thought, okay, this is something. And if you think the overall race winner, Canet, fluffed his start and was actually with Darryn Binder, I was actually screaming at my TV because Darryn, I think, passed him twice Canet.
Yeah.
And I was like, Darryn, stop passing him. Follow him. He's going to
Follow
take
him,
you
yeah.
to the front. But Darryn Binder doesn't follow. He pass or be passed mentality type thing. But anyway, got himself into that kind of that little pocket just behind the leaders. And I just thought this is going to get better for Darryn, because I think he's going to grow into this race. Adrenaline's going to help with the injury. Well, it was either going to go that way, or the injury is going to really take its toll and he was going to go backwards. But either way, it was looking good. Then the guy comes down the straight and, avoided a near disaster of an incident down that front. But the bike sets out. And we've seen frustration from Darryn Binder. There's no doubt about that in the past. But you could see, I felt it. I felt it for the guy. I felt like punching that bike, punching my TV, headbutting my tiny thin wall here in the UK and going into the next door neighbor's lounge. But it is. It's such a frustrating, draining exercise in many ways, being a Darryn and a Brad fan, because we know what's there. God, we know what's there. We've lived, we've breathed it, we know what's there, and they're just not getting what they deserve, especially Darryn now.
Yeah, and Rob, it must have been an electrical fault, because if you look at Rueda in Moto3, you saw that puff of smoke. He pulled the clutch in and he moved out the way. Darren's bike just died. That's why he was very lucky. I can't remember who it was who tagged him a little bit. They could have had a massive crash. So thank heavens that didn't happen, but you're quite right. And whoever said he's on a bit of a lemon of a bike, I don't agree. Because look how good Albert Arenas was. For a guy, when they gave his statistics, yes, he hasn't performed in Moto2. He's had 100 odd starts, 1 or 2 podiums, but still, he was very competitive for most of the weekend. And I think Darryn was ready to outshine him again. Darren's riding injured. So I'm not going to say I agree with the fact that the bike might be a bit of a lemon. I think that bike is pretty competitive. But, it can't be competitive when it breaks down. So you're very, very disappointing, and we share Darren's frustration. When it happens to him, why didn't it happen to Arenas? We don't want it to happen to anyone, but why to our boykies, But anyway, you're sad luck for him. But, Darryn, he'll bounce back next week. And, but as you say, it's a good track for him. And he was in that bubble. So anything could have happened. He could have finished with Canet in the front, or probably where he was. I think they were racing 8, 9, 10 at that point in time. So, a bit disappointing. So hopefully they've sorted it out. But, these are mechanical things, and poo does happen, unfortunately.
It does, unfortunately. We've got a break this weekend, and then we've got Jerez back into Europe next weekend. Really looking forward to that. I think the teams are looking forward to it. I'm hoping, as I mentioned in the previous show, that there might be a bit of stability coming the way, certainly of KTM and others, a bit of consistency, a bit of momentum for the likes of Brad and Darryn. Being back in Europe, everything's a lot more accessible. Certainly the factory and getting parts and doing everything. The whole exercise is just better. There's a testing coming up that's going to help as well. So a little bit more positive things to look forward to, which I think will help a lot of people. The thing with Jerez is it's just going to be everyone. There's so many people that can be fast there, and certainly the likes of Marquez and Pecco and the Ducatis are going to be fast there. The KTMs have proven good pace there. So let's hope that this kind of thought we have in our mind of right now it's Europe and things are going to change. As much as I appreciate and love what Marc Marquez is doing, as a lot of people have pointed out, I do want to see someone really giving it to Marc Marquez. But that's up to them. It's not up to Marc to go slower and let them give them a chance. It's up to them. So I'm hoping that'll happen. Talking about the Brad and KTM exercise next week, Tuesday, as I said, keep a look on the Motor Rider World Facebook page, because I'll post the interview with Bjorn and Ryan Esmond, the Esmond brothers who work in the paddock. That's going to be a great interview. I'm going to try and extract as much information as I can, as you said, about the vibe, the feel, if there's any plan going on in that, just as much information as we can from the KTM side of Brad and the Pedro Acosta and, everything else that they've gotten and how they got into those. There's just so many great narratives that we're going to dive into. So keep a lookout for that. Keep a lookout for the Marc Marquez interview that I'm going to post up on my brother's going to post up on the Facebook page. It's 25 minutes or something, but it's a really good watch. And it's been great talking to everyone. Thank you, everyone, so much for hope we weren't too noisy under Essex tonight. Yeah, because I like silent things now, I like quiet but powerful, like my Zero motorcycles. So yeah, no, I don't like noisy things anymore. Oli Motor, I won't be in Misano on Monday. I'm only flying there next week, Thursday, because the event's next weekend. So hit me up if you are still in Misano. I'd love to see you there. But yeah, everybody, thank you so much for a great show. What's this? Have a lacquer one, Paul. Get that cap signed, Rainer Albrecht. Paul, you need to get your cap signed. I know someone who's going to 2 MotoGPs later on in the year that you can send it and get it done. But Paul, yeah, thank you so much. Thank you to everyone in the comments. Great show. I think we had some really entertaining and controversial topics there, and look forward to the start of the European runs in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, Rob, thank you very much to everyone who's listening, tuned in, posted comments. Thanks, guys. And please remember, we're just fans. We're not anything more than that. Another fantastic 2 hours. I can't believe it goes by so quickly. And looking forward to being in Europe. And Rob, can't wait if you get the Estimate brothers. I think that's going to be really something unique to, we talking about what everyone watching on TV sees.
Yes.
They'll have those insights that we don't get. So yes, that's going to be special if you can organize that.
Yeah, it's going to happen. Very excited. Bjorn's been great through the whole exercise. So there we go. Don't not sign on flea market merch, James Dent. They're buying the proper one then, James. What's wrong with you?
Tell him and Sheridan to hold their horses there. Eh? It's their joke, this thing about it being from the flea market. Rumor flea market.
Paul, you leave it there, my bud. You leave it there. Loud and proud. You leave it. Thank you, everyone, and have a great couple of weeks, and we'll catch up with you next week, Tuesday. Goodbye.
Yeah, lekker. Cheers, everyone.